I'm going to share my screen for those that are on the video just to kind of help show visually. The nice thing is you can, look this up. I have a guide that includes it in, which is what's up on my screen right now. So the pelvic floor is this, like, what is it? Where is it? And really it's like a sling that's at the bottom of all of our like reproductive organs. So our bladder, our uterus, our bowels. So the lower part of our spine by our glutes, our pubic bone. There's these series of muscles too. And that's where there's about 14 different muscles, surprisingly, which if you're seeing the image, it shows all the different muscles. And there's like 3 layers to this as well. And so this is the area that holds all the pelvic floor organs, or all the organs together of the pelvis, as I mentioned. So the uterus, the bladder for women. And this is also where we find the stability. So it's kind of where those muscles support the frame and function of the lower part of our body. It's also not only for the internal organs, but it also helps with our sexual function. And as well as this area has, if we're going to have kids, has to grow pretty big and be flexible. So women, it's very important that this space is flexible and strong because everything kind of has to open up. So those muscles take a lot of brunt and beating when we have children, especially. So that's where a lot of the conditions come from, is after children, but there's other factors of life. And then most people aren't aware is that this is also a space that is very prominent for our breathing. So when we look at the muscles and the bones, it's kind of like an accordion. They open and close. As I mentioned, when you have children, like we know, it functionally has to open. So when we're breathing, in the yogic tradition, we talk about breathing the belly, the ribs, and the chest. It comes from that space. It comes from the lower part of our body. When we're looking at the energy system, the chakras, the base of our spine is our root chakra, and then we go up to the sacral chakra. So they're the main components that start that grounding from up. We start at the base of our spine up. And so that's where this whole area comes from as well in an energy system, is that it's the muscles at the base to ground us, and they need to be supported, because a lot of times too, we're sitting all day long too. And that's not helpful at all.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Those of you watching the video podcast, you caught that. And for those of you just listening on audio, we'll have a link in the show notes where you can take a look at that diagram to support you, so you can get a closer look. But I'm glad you've talked a little bit about this, and because again, it's not something you're thinking about every day, and it's really one of those things where it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, right? It's not like you see your elbow and you're like, oh, I bumped it, I got a bruise or something. You don't necessarily see it. So it could be easily overlooked, I guess, when you're thinking about, wellness in general. But let's talk a little bit about why we should be paying attention to our pelvic floor. Why do we need a healthy pelvic floor? And why is it so important for us to even be thinking about this for women's health?
Yeah, so when it comes to health in general, this space is really the secretion of your body. So when we think of our health, we talk about having, good quality secretion, and that includes our urine and our fecal. And when that isn't happening properly, that's a lot of the times that's a malfunction in this space, or can be contributed depending on what's happening. And so we want to make sure that this area is flowing. Us as women, it's also really important because this is where we house a lot of our hormones that keep us healthy and safe for our life. So, our estrogen, all these things live in our ovaries and in this space. And if we're not properly taking care of it, it can cause a lot of other issues when it comes to hormonal balance as well. And mostly, again, it's that lifestyle of when we are just doing our daily activities, and all of a sudden we're, a little bit of urine comes out, or we're not secreting for far enough, and we could have urinary tract infections, yeast infections, can caused by some pelvic floor conditions. Again, we can have issues with our secretion of fecal matter. There's endometriosis, there's endometriosis. So there's other conditions that live in this space when we're not properly taking care of it. And then there's all the other conditions as well. And again, it also helps us with our low back. So when we're thinking about just overall health, our lower back, when we're building and strengthening the space, it will help our lower back muscles. As I mentioned, I had issues with IBS. We actually can have contraction of flow to our legs. So it can also have issues for like varicose veins if we have not enough flow in our pelvic and pelvic floor area. So we want to make sure that can help with our circulation. There's also, they're finding that the pelvis is connected to our jaw. So if we have clenching jaw, we're actually connecting that to our pelvic floor. So I know I'm in the process of, with my chiropractor, releasing my jaw tension. And when I started the journey to my pelvis, I was noticing my jaw was starting to click. So those things, everything is structurally connected, and that space, if it's not taken care of, can have some major impact on the body.
I'm glad you shared that, right? Because there might be those listening today are like, oh, I've had a couple of these issues. Maybe I should be paying attention. But there might be those who either are totally disconnected. They don't have any awareness, or they just don't have any issues. But it sounds like from your perspective and a holistic health and wellness perspective, we're also talking about, even if you don't have any current issues, there's a preventative piece here. We should all really be paying attention and caring for our pelvic floor health so that we can stay healthy for the long term and avoid maybe some of these other secondary issues that might be related. Is that accurate?
Yes. And it's important, especially that's why I focus on 35 as early and even earlier than that. Because as we get older, the higher the risk we are to getting a pelvic floor condition. And so if you take care of it now, or if you're starting to notice that you're getting, yeast infections, or you're noticing these things, if you're becoming more aware, as you progress, you might say like, oh, I do have a condition, or you're building that strength and that flexibility. So you might not have that condition along the line. So, but it becomes more prevalent as we get older. So the more proactive we can be to keep the space healthy, the better for us down the line.
Well, that totally makes sense. I know you want to share some statistics as well, just for those of you who are like, I'm still not quite convinced. Let's get into some of the hard data here about women in regards to having pelvic floor conditions in their lifetime.
Yeah, so let me pop that up. I want to make sure I get these right for you guys. But yeah, they are very common. So 10% of women ages 20 to 39 are going to have a pelvic floor condition. 20% of women ages 40 to 59. 37% of women ages 60 to 79, and nearly half of women age 80 and older will have a pelvic floor condition. So it's more common than we give it credit for.
Yeah. And like you said, it increases over time. So no matter where you are right now within that age timeframe, it's something to be paying attention to be proactive. Let's talk about some of the various conditions, because I know you've thrown out a lot of different things here. Let's kind of narrow it down for people. What are some of the main pelvic floor conditions we want to be thinking about that we might face in our lifetime? Kind of what causes them, and what can we be thinking about?
Yeah, so the main ones that are most common for women are urinary incontinence or fecal incontinence. That's where there's pressure in the abdominal, where if you're jumping or running, you might secrete a little bit of urine or fecal. So that's really common. There's also pelvic pain during intercourse, as I had mentioned as well, or my condition, that's another condition as well, that tightness. There's the urinary urgency. So that's an overactive bladder, is where the bladder is just functioning at a hyper speed, or we're not, there's pressure on it and it's not getting rid of all the urine. So you also want to make sure that you're getting rid of all the urine as well. So that's a common one. There's bowel dysfunction. That's another one too. And that's sometimes contributed to what we call pelvic organ prolapse. So when you were looking at the image, or you look at the image, it's where basically those internal organs drop down. And so they can, at some point, like if you have a uterus that drops down, it can actually go through the vaginal opening, like push out. So you can have rectal prolapse. You can even have bladder prolapse. So those muscles just, they're so what we call low toned that they go down and out. And then you also have vaginal atrophy, which is very common after menopause, where you get dryness, discomfort, pain, thinness in the vaginal opening. So that's common for women, especially. And so when we look at these conditions, they're put into two different categories. So there's the high tone, which I mentioned. That's where things are really congested and really tight. And so that's things such as painful, sex, overly intense, inflexible. We have spasms. You're able to stretch or move. So that's very common. And then there's also the low tone. That's where what we call UI, or urinary incontinence, or stress incontinence, because stress can actually increase UI. There's stress urinary incontinence. When we're stressed out, it can cause the muscles to secrete as well. And then there's also losing of urine and stool. There's the pelvic organ prolapse. So that's, again, the dropping down. There's the overactive bladder. That's when things are low toned, when their things are not strong enough. And some women even have a mix of both, which gets even more complicated. So those are the main ones that women encounter at some point. There's so many other, there's things like, endometriosis and things like that. They're in a whole different category because there's hormonal stuff involved, but these are physical things that happen to the pelvic floor at some point. They can be caused by a multitude of things. So surgery, age, again, more common post-menopause. Menopause is usually around 40 plus. It can actually go as early as 28. So even if you're not, if your clients aren't in menopause yet, or they're young, you think too young, there's never enough time to learn about menopause. That's another taboo topic. And it's something that naturally happens for every woman. No medication will ever take that away. So we all just have to go through it, and our body changes. So the more you can educate yourself about menopause, that's another thing I help people with, the better. Labor and pregnancy, most common. A lot of people, even after one child, might have prolapse. Genetics, like my case in point, extra weight, injury, constipation. So if you're straining to go to the bathroom, so if constipation is a health issue that you're having, getting that on track, because the more we strain, the harder it is on that area. Some people can actually get it from lifting. So lift with your legs, right? I say lift with your legs, protect that low back. Obesity, and again, back pain. So it's not just pregnancies and labor that causes this. There's many other things.
So that's interesting, right? So like it could be genetic, it could be just normal aging. And you said stress earlier, like everybody has stress. So it's like, okay, all these things could cause this. So let's talk about what we can do to either be preventative, or what we can do if we're noticing signs and symptoms to start overcoming these conditions. What can we do just to stay healthy and keep our pelvic floor in good condition, Molly?
Yeah, so there's many different holistic things that I've come across in ways. There's, obviously there's medical technology, like I mentioned. But for me personally, I've been doing yoga for 20 years, and that's helped me not only with the physical, but the stress. So I focus a lot on connecting to that space in my practices. I actually do like Yoga for Women's Health series where we focus on that. And we talk about different poses that work for the pelvic floor. I also work a lot in personally engaging my lower abdominal muscles. So what we call in yoga, they're called the bandhas. And there's these lock systems, but essentially it's the lower one is like imagining you're kind of stopping yourself from going to the bathroom, and then you draw in and up through that belly button. So it actually, as you're drawing in and up, it's kind of like a scooping. So like kind of like an ice cream scooper, scooping up. And it actually helps with posture too. If you notice when you're engaging that space, so you just draw in a little bit and then draw in a little bit more and scoop up, your spine lifts up. So that's a helpful one as well. Some other things you can do if you have a condition, again, there's physical therapies out there. If you're kind of noticing one of the things you're like, okay, I seem to go to the bathroom a lot, more than I have been in a while, start making a journal, start tracking down, how much you're going to the bathroom. Things like caffeine, alcohol can all contribute to that as well. You might want to decrease the amount of water intake because our foods and stuff have water in them. So if you're having too much water and you have an overactive bladder, that can cause some issues. As well as just there's Kegel exercises. That's very common. That's a whole nother conversation, but building that strength, there's exercises you can do. There's also herbs that you can take. I actually take yarrow to help with, when I was talking about the flow of my legs, because I have a history in my family of varicose veins. So I take yarrow to help kind of get things moving and flowing down there. So you can take tinctures and other things as well that I personally enjoy. I've been getting into herbalism and have a friend that's a wealth of knowledge on that. And just taking breaks throughout the day. We don't think enough about that. I know I'm guilty of that. When you're working, you just get so transfixed on what you're doing. But taking a break, walking around, doing some twists, just moving the lower body